So far away, Nisha, what are we talking about today?
We're talking about an amusing article that I found, which is titled, "That Time the Beatles Nearly Burned Down a Club with a Flaming Condom."
Oh man, I bet the guy who wrote that's a hero. Possibly a legend. Contrary to the squeaky clean image presented of the band later in their career, the Beatles actually began their life playing hard rock songs in German strip clubs, one of which they apparently tried to burn down with a flaming condom.
When you mention the Beatles, people usually have like one or two images of them.
Yeah, it's either the Beatles in their Sgt. Pepper days, when they all wore bright, colourful clothing and were basically proto-hipsters, or the days earlier in their career when they were all clean-cut with the same haircut and were eerily reminiscent of Howard from The Big Bang Theory on a job interview. Because I just can't not look at that haircut that they have, the mop-top haircut. I know I'm saying that with this haircut, but they just look so much like Howard from The Big Bang Theory, it freaks me out. I feel so bad for that actor, because one of the characters, an awful shitbird, who is like creepily sexually suggestive towards women.
If you had your own game character, we could hang out, maybe go on a quest.
And also, he just looks like an idiot. And to prove my point that the Beatles look like him on a job interview, I'd now like whoever edits this video to just Photoshop in Howard from The Big Bang Theory as part of the Beatles and see how well he fits in. While these two images of the band are, in all likelihood, the most popular and enduring, when they first started out playing music in the 1960s, they actually looked like this. So Nisha, you're not physically present today, you know, social distancing, you've got to maintain that shit, but you do have a picture of the Beatles from around this time in front of you, and like, what are your thoughts, like, you know, in comparison to how they looked, like, you know, later in their career? In
this image, they're wearing like leather jackets, look like mega rock stars, which is a lot different from what you'd imagine them to look like usually.
Like, they look like they should be part of Motley Crue. Like, they really do. They look like fucking hard rockers, because they were. And as I mentioned in the introduction to this piece, and the Beatles got their start playing hard rock music in German strip clubs, and they later changed the sound of their music quite dramatically and their look, as in a process known as selling the fuck out to become ultra millionaires. And the story goes that they fought very hard against changing their image up until like a manager somewhere went, "Do you want to be rich or not?" And he put them all in identical suits and gave them all the same haircut and basically turned them into a proto-boy band. And they all became multi-millionaires and were worldwide famous and one of, you know, the biggest rock bands on the planet.
Yeah, it's quite a common thing for artists to start out in their own like sort of indie style and then sell out and become something completely different.
But also millionaires. And we can use many examples like there's Katy Perry, who started out as a Christian rock singer. And then my favourite example, because this is the one that people tend to get the most annoyed about, is Nirvana. And you're probably thinking, Karl, Kurt Cobain didn't sell out, he was grunge. They were fighting against the man. And that was true up until the release of Nevermind, which you will probably know as like, you know, the album that featured Smells Like Teen Spirit. Because the story goes that Kurt Cobain fucking hated that album because it wasn't grunge. It was grunge edited and mastered in a way that made it into pop music. And Kurt Cobain hated that album so much because basically they mixed it like a pop album, but they just obviously kept Nirvana's sound. And he was so against releasing that album, he actually wanted to call it Sheep, in reference to the fact the only people who are going to buy it and listen to this music are sheep. And then obviously it went on to become this huge, massive fucking hit and is what launched the band into, like, you know, like stratospheric success.
It kind of reminds me of the whole Busted thing, because they were obviously really popular, and then Charlie Simpson hated the music, so left, joined Fight Star.
Fight Star sucked ass.
Yeah, who flopped. And
then he came back and joined Busted. He came back after all the shit talking he did. It's like, oh man, it's not real music. I want to make proper music for my real fans. And slowly slumped back when he realised people will listen to that music, but not as many as will listen to the other kind. Anyway, the Beatles.
Right, so yeah, bringing it back to the Beatles, when they started out, they were like seen as like proper like heavy metal rock stars.
Like, yeah, I mean, not heavy metal, because obviously heavy metal didn't exist at the time, but they were like, as close to, like, you know, just the grungy, like back alley, like on tour rock stars that you can think of. Like sex, drugs and rock and roll was their forte for many years while they were in Germany during the 60s. Or at least half of them were, because the band lineup changed from their initial breakout up to the point that they became the Beatles as we know them today. And it's noted that while they were in Germany, the only member of the band who even spoke like a lick of German was Pete Best, who we've talked about in the video before. And even then, his German wasn't good enough to really communicate with people there. And what happened was the Beatles were basically given carte blanche to play whatever the fuck they wanted, as long as what they played was loud. So what they would do is just go on stage for a couple hours a night and just play guitar as loud as they could, and generally just indulge themselves in all the facets of rock star life people we're familiar with, like, you know, sleeping with prostitutes, taking copious amounts of drugs and drinking all the time. And there are theories out there that one of the reasons that the Beatles became such polished musicians is because they basically played like 3 hours a day, every day on stage for several years straight, which allowed them to just hone their performing skills to the point where they became the fucking Beatles.
Yeah, when I imagine the Beatles, I can't imagine them like playing like rock music like that 3 hours every day. And then like taking on the party sort of lifestyle, drinking drugs. It's something you'd see the Motley Crue doing, like that film, The Dirt.
Oh, that feels so good. That's what you imagine, isn't it? Yeah, like when you're thinking like, oh no, the hard partying, hard rocking lifestyle, you think of people like the Motley Crue, Alice Cooper, Ozzy Osbourne, like, you know, all those big fucking metal bands from the 80s. The Beatles were doing that in the fucking 60s. And they were basically like pioneering that kind of hard rocking lifestyle. And in a similar vein to the Motley Crue example, who did some crazy stuff when they weren't on stage, examples of which will no doubt be below me right now in a fact bar, the Beatles did like to indulge in some like quite outrageous behaviour. One example being starting every show by shouting Heil Hitler and doing a Nazi salute to the German audience. And if people are wondering which member of the Beatles did that, you don't need to ask, it was John Lennon. Because of course it was John Lennon. And then like after shows, they would like, you know, drink, party, do drugs, and they would like, you know, sleep with prostitutes and do things like piss out of hotel windows onto people below while flipping them off. If you're wondering, Karl, which member of the Beatles was that? It's like, it was John Lennon again.
Obvious.
Of course it was John Lennon. Fucking prick.
So pardon the pun, but the burning question is...
Yes.
What is this about them nailing a flaming condom to a wall?
Well, first things first, never apologise for puns on this channel. And second thing second, that is a story that is like quite amazing in of itself, because that's not a one-time thing. That's something the Beatles used to do to end a lot of their shows. They would just nail a condom to the wall and set it on fire. And that was how they ended their shows, and they thought it was funny. But at some point during their like career in Hamburg, they earned the ire of a club owner called Bruno. It's like Koschmider. I'm hoping I'm pronouncing that correctly. I'm not like, you know, German's not a language that I'm all too familiar with, but they pissed him off by playing a rival club. And Koschmider was so mad that he got the band arrested for arson when he pointed out to the police, well, they tried to set my club on fire. And it all culminated in the Beatles being like, you know, soundly and unceremoniously asked to leave Germany and being deported back to the UK, where their career, I'd say, changed paths for the better, and the band began to flourish. Nisha, any thoughts about the things that I've just said?
I just find it really weird, because I know like a lot of musicians, like rock stars and stuff, do weird stuff, but that just seems too weird, like very specifically weird. Like, why a condom?
Because why not a condom, Nisha?
Also, like, set a bin on fire. Like, imagine like they'd set bins on fire and stuff like that. But it's just like the fact they just a condom. It's just weird.
Well, that's rock and roll. And my favourite part about this is obviously this happened in the 60s. This is long before you had stuff like the Sex Pistols destroying their equipment on stage. So, you know, cultivate the image of a rock star. The Beatles, like, you know, they pioneered this in a way, invented that kind of behaviour, and then very quickly shied away from it when like, they tried to cultivate this very squeaky clean image. And before we move on, because this is fucking amazing, during my research for this article, I encountered a little extra fact about the Beatles. We'll never be able to turn into a full video, but is amusing nonetheless. And that is that one of the earliest albums the Beatles ever released was actually a compilation of hits from their previous album, because the previous album was so popular, making it one of the first greatest hits collections, like, you know, in musical history. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because the album was simply titled The Beatles Hits. You're like thinking, like, Karl, why is that amusing? Nisha, would you like to scroll down on the article and look at the album cover?
Yep, I'm there.
What do you see?
I see an album cover which looks like it says The Beatles Shits.
That's one of the most famous rock bands on the planet, folks. So, Nisha, I think there's an argument to be made that, you know, YouTubers, and I hate using this word, but influencers are modern day rock stars, correct? Like, they are the people who have like the screaming crowds. Like, not us, but, you know, the other bigger YouTubers who play the game a bit more. Like, they're the people who have like the legions of screaming fans. And in that vein, like, what is like the most extreme or outrageous example of behaviour you've heard being undertaken by, like, you know, people on the interwebs? People might say, like, oh, nailing a flaming condom to a wall is kind of weird and strange, but bear in mind, like, one of the biggest people on this platform, like, went into the middle of the Japanese suicide forest and just filmed a dead body.
Oh,
like, think about that, that's crazy.
Yeah, I tried to forget that happened.
Like, can you imagine if a band did that back in the day? And I'm wondering now, if you fast forward 20, 30 years, will stuff that people were, like, morally offended by be stuff that we talk about, like, oh, it's pretty cool when they did it though, right? So I'm guessing at the time, people were pissed off at, like, you know, the Beatles going on stage and doing big old, like, Heil Hitler salutes while, like, getting pissed and slamming prostitutes. But, like, you know, the band's legacy is, like, so fairly secured now that, like, stuff like that, which you think would be a huge thing people would talk about all the time, is, like, barely a footnote. Like, if you're successful enough, can you get away with shit like that happening earlier in your career or, you know, at the height of it?
Well, we know one of the most famous YouTubers, like, used like racist language
all the time, yeah.
Still has the hugest following that I know of. It's probably changed a little bit, but
well, YouTube released a video celebrating that he got 100 million subs.
I used to watch him, but then ever since he started doing shit like that, I just haven't watched any of his stuff. And when I did look at what he was making recently, it's just, there's no effort there. It's like he's just can't be bothered. He's just making videos for the sake of it because he knows people will watch them.
And with that, you can draw a direct parallel to what we spoke about earlier, where bands and stuff, like, early in their careers, like, oh man, we're going to play it for the music. It's like creativity. You can't hamper that. And then they get offered millions of dollars and sell the fuck out, and they just go through the motions. Because, yeah, I'd rather do that and be rich. But I think saying I'd rather cry in a Ferrari than out on the street. That reminds me a little bit of a great quote I heard uttered by one Lucas from the channel, where we were just casually hanging out with some friends, and a mutual friend of ours went, oh man, has anyone seen Jon Tron's latest video? To which Lucas responded without even thinking, no, but I've seen his racist tweets. And like, I just fucking lost it. Man, that's a thing that happened, and he's still fucking getting videos. And the other one is it Pro Jared?
Oh, I don't
like,
know.
Cheated on his wife. Oh, that was an amazing one. Like, he cheated on his wife, and then, like, announced his divorce from his wife, like, on Twitter, and his wife didn't know, and then blocked his wife.
Oh my god!
It's like, what? That's amazing. That's some rock star shenanigans happening there, and I want to see more YouTubers lean into, like, the outrageous lifestyle aspect of it. Because the reason people get so pissed off is not leaning into it hard enough. Like, no one got mad at Motley Crue for, like, you know, pissing in swimming pools and throwing TVs out of hotel windows, because that was their life. Like, people expected that. That's like the lifestyle of the big dick rock star. So what we need to now do is start a movement for YouTubers of just start being assholes more. Do it. All the big YouTubers, start being dickheads. Because if you all own it, then that people are like, well, that's just being a YouTuber. It comes part and parcel of the package.
It just means you're a shit person.
It does, yeah, but I want to try and push that. I want to try and get... because, like, I get so mad when I see them, like, they'll make one mistake, they'll do one thing, and then they'll apologise and immediately back. It's like, nah, man, that's who you are as a person. Lean into it.
No.
Like, the mask dropped for a split second and we thought you're a terrible person. Own it.